The highly prolific J-horror master Kiyoshi Kurosawa quietly dropped his latest film, the scariest I've seen all year, and it could very easily maintain that title into the year's end, on a random streaming website to relative obscurity. That film is called Chime, and it's a quick 45-minute horror piece, the first of 3 works from Kurosawa premiering this year alone, that acts as a pure distillation of his previous style and preoccupations, with tinges of his most acclaimed works like Cure and Pulse running all throughout it. So Chime could, rather reductively, be described as Kurosawa playing his greatest hits in one brief, 45-minute dread-induced package, but if you're anything like me, that's one of the most exciting sentences you could possibly hear. With this film, he takes his famed, doom-laden tales of alienation and ennui and morphs them into purely abstract ambient terror, slowly sinking its claws into you even with a very limited runtime. It's about a slowly creeping madness that begins entering the life of Takuji, a culinary arts teacher who lives a rather sterile and detached personal and professional life. When one of his students claims to hear a mysterious chime-like sound, a series of unsettling events begins to occur in the mundane life of this cooking teacher. Chime is covering much of the same thematic ground for Kurosawa, and the film's uncanny feel will also be recognizable for anyone familiar with his past work. But there is something particularly revelatory about Chime, and the way Kurosawa weaponizes his limited runtime as further means to unnerve the audience, where you're left constantly watching the clock, waiting to find answers as questions continue to compound on themselves, but knowing there's very little time left to receive those answers, because there's no clear source, no definite figure to point at for this mysterious chime-like noise that incites much of the film's terror. Kurosawa refuses to give these answers, allowing his film to play out as some kind of sinister enigma that may give very little in terms of story, but more than makes up for it with this constant hum of dread and despair. Kurosawa employs a wide assortment of formal tools to unmoor and unsettle that go beyond the simple, easy scares of most contemporary horror, playing eerie, ghostly games with his sounds and visuals, where images of the disposal of a human body are played with the same dispassion as taking out the trash. His horror is really birthed from banality, where even day-to-day activities possess the same level of unease as gruesome murders do. He manages to turn everyday sounds or objects found in an increasingly urbanized Japan into these invisible forces of evil. The same knife used to carefully mince onions, now slicing through human skin. The sounds of a passenger train providing the backdrop to a sudden, thoughtless murder. But Kurosawa's moments of violence are never gratuitous. They're always tactfully deployed, and almost always come out of nowhere. There's also a simple but effective juxtaposition of a clean, deeply disinfected cooking classroom, now crawling with some unidentifiable, free-floating infection. It's this very spare formalism that makes the sense of dread and foreboding even more oppressive, where in a moment's notice a scene can go from feeling rather minor to deeply unnerving. Nothing here quite reaches the heights of that one scene from Pulse. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but the cryptic, supernaturally tinged ambiance Kurosawa creates from very little here is very admirable. The final moments of Chime disrupt much of the formal groundwork the preceding half hour established, where its earlier, carefully composed static shots and overall sterility now make way for an overbearing score and intensely grainy visual textures. This brief shift to aggressive handheld camera work in 16mm film now taking on a threatening aura in and of itself, and giving some shape to the otherwise formless menace at its center. It's a welcome surprise to see such a dramatic shift in this slender of a runtime, but it allows Kurosawa to flex his muscles a little and show that he can accomplish more in a measly 45 minutes than most filmmakers do in double or triple that running time. Chime is not your traditional scary movie, because it is operating on such a different wavelength from most horror films of today, but unlike those films, Chime really manages to burrow under your skin and stay there. It doesn't bombard you with these fleeting scares, but instead these unsettlingly dull ones that stick with you because of their casual malevolence. Chime may feel like just a brief introduction to a more sprawling narrative we'll never see, but it's unsatisfying by design, a puzzling nightmare that you wake up from and have left unfinished, with nothing but faint suggestions of what horrors were to come.